Hello guys, my name is Gomez, and in this tutorial I'll teach you step by step everything you need to know about variables in Python. To create a variable in Python, all you have to do is specify the variable name followed by the assignment operator and then followed by the value, like this. For example, I have a variable called name, and I'll use the assignment operator and then the value. So the value for this variable is Joe. Like that, I have created a variable in Python. So I'll just create a few other variables and then we'll move from there. So another variable I'll create is age, and I'll assign a value of 12. I also created a variable height, and I'll assign a value of 8.1. So we have created 3 variables in Python, and it's that easy. It's not complicated. So what I'll do is try to print these variables and see what happens. So if I print name, it provides me the value of name. So if you're just someone who is starting out with Python, a print is a function that is used to display output on your console, or in other words, just printing something out on the screen. So I also say print age, and it provides 12. And the same thing, if I print height, it will provide 8.1. So the concept of variables is very important in programming, and is common in almost every programming language because programs need a way to store data. So this is temporary during the life cycle of the program. If you want to talk about persistent storage, then you have to start looking on other things like database management systems and everything like that. To keep data during the life cycle of a program, we use variables. And as I said, it is a common concept in almost every programming language. It's also very important to understand how things really work under the hood. It just makes you a better programmer. So for example, here I've created a variable age and I've assigned 13 to it. Now the question is, what happens behind the scenes? So Python creates an object with the value that we have specified, in this case 13. And then the variable age points to that object in memory. Like the image you're seeing, we have an object with the value 13, and age is pointing to that object in memory. So much so that when we print age, it gives us the value that is in memory for that object. So as I said, variables are just pointers or references to an object that is in memory. Therefore, we can have an object with multiple references or multiple pointers. Let me give you an example of that. So here I have a variable age with the value 13, and I have another variable, my age, with the value of age. With what I said, that every time you create a variable, an object is created in memory, you might also think like in this scenario, we have created 2 objects in memory. But Python doesn't do that. So since we've created an object age with the value 13, and then we have created another object my age with the value age, or what Python does is create 2 variables that are pointing to the same object in memory. So now we have 2 variables, age and my age, and they are pointing to the same object in memory. But how do we know that what we are saying is true? How can we prove it? In Python, there's a concept called object identity. And what object identity guarantees us is that for every object that has been created in memory, it will assign a unique identifier to it. So in this case, we have 2 variables, age and my age. If they are pointing to the same object, then their object identifier has to be the same. So let's see if these two have the same object identifier. So I have age 13, and then we have my age, which has been assigned the value of age. So if we print the object identifier, which we use the function ID and the object that we want to check. So here we're checking age, and here we're checking my age. If we run it, we see that they have the same object identifier. So basically we just have two references pointing to the same object in memory. Okay, now let's see what happens when we assign new values to the variable age and the variable my age. So when we assign new values, this is what happens. So a new object is also created in memory again with the value 18, and another object with the value 20. So this is how it will look. Remember, age at first was 13. Now we have assigned it a new value 18. Therefore, age points to that new object in memory, and my age also points to the new object in memory. Therefore, 13 now has no pointers to it. So garbage collection removes every object that has no references in memory. So after garbage collection, our memory might look like this. So we have age pointing to 18 in memory and my age pointing to 20 in memory. Now we don't have 13 because it has been removed from memory. You have maybe heard that Python is a dynamically typed programming language, but what does that mean? The opposite of a dynamically typed programming language is a statically typed programming language. And an example of a statically typed programming language would be Java or C++. But Python is a dynamically typed programming language. And what that basically means is that you're not required to specify the variable type in advance, like the way you do with Java or maybe C++. So for example, in Java, to declare a variable, I would say if it's a string, I would say string and then provide the name of the variable followed by the assignment operator and then the value. So this is how I would declare and assign a variable in Java. But Python doesn't require us to specify the variable type. So this works for Python. So just the name of the variable and the value. So the question would be, does Python therefore use data types? Of course, Python does. But Python is also called a type-inferred programming language. And what that means is that Python can automatically identify the variable type when you've provided the variable. For example, if I say type name, it will still say that this is a string, though we did not specifically provide that this is a string. And with that, you are able to change the variable type whenever you want. For example, I can say name equals 34 for whatever reason. And if I say the type for this variable, it will say it's an integer. Okay, I can change it to, first of all, I can change the value of the variable, but I can also change the type of the variable in Python. And we have no restrictions for that. So let's look at some of the tips and tricks we can use when creating variables in Python. First of all, we can assign the same value to several variables simultaneously. How do we do that? For example, I have a variable, let's just say Joe, and I have another variable, let's say Jen, And what I want is to give them the same age. So their age will be 16. Okay. If I run it, you see that it gives me an error. Okay. Not that. Let's put the equal sign. Yeah. So if I print, Joe, it gives me the value 16. The same thing if I print Jen, it gives me the value 16. Another way of doing this would be to say Joe equals 16 and Jen equals 16. But we want to do this on the same line simultaneously. So that's why I would prefer to use the other method. Another thing we can do with Python variables is assigning multiple values to multiple variables on the same line. And this is one cool feature of Python. So to do that, I would say name, comma, okay, I would say student name, comma, student ID equals, and then I would provide the value of student name, let's say Gomez, and then I'll use another comma and provide the student ID, let's say 12. Okay, so if I print student name, you see it's Gomez, and if I print student ID, it'll be 12. You can do this on separate lines. I can do the same. I can remove the name here and put the equal sign there and say the name is okay. I can say okay, so I just say Gomez again and remove this comma here, and you see it's the same. But doing the previous method, using the previous method, I think it simplifies things a little bit. Okay, so yeah, those are some of the things you can do with variables in Python. Let's finalize this tutorial by talking about rules for naming variables. So Python is very flexible. You can name your variables everything, but there are some of the rules you have to follow. So let's talk about some of these rules. Rule number 1: variable names should have a combination of letters in lowercase a to z or uppercase a to z, or digits 0 to 9, and you can also use underscore. Rule number 2: never use special symbols like the pound sign, the @ sign. Those are not allowed when naming your variables. Rule number 3: don't start a variable name with a digit. And the last rule is no variable name can have the same name as a reserved keyword. So these are some of the examples of reserved keywords. So these reserved keywords are just keywords or names, I'll just say keywords, that Python has reserved to use for its own things. For example, we use the def keyword when defining a function in Python. We use the if when defining a condition statement in Python. So we are not allowed to use these keywords. Okay, so let us just write a couple of valid variable names. So let's say I would say name equals James. Name is a valid variable name because if I run it, there are no errors. But if I put 0, then it has to give me an error because this rule says don't start a variable name with a digit. Okay, if I put in a symbol, let's say $, for some reason, it gives me an error because this rule says don't use symbols. So, but I can put the digit anywhere. I don't just have to start with a digit. And I can also, I can't use keywords like def. That will also give me an error. Okay, otherwise anything else will work. Lastly, let's talk about naming conventions in Python. So basically, PEP 8 recommends that you should use the snake case convention when naming your variable names, but also your functions, your function names. So with snake case, what we do is when we are combining multiple words, we use the underscore to join those words. For example, I have a couple of words here and I've joined them by the underscore. This is how we are supposed to name our, this is how we are to name our variable names. We can use the camel case, but that is not recommended. Okay, so the camel case would be like this: student name. It also works. It's also a good naming convention. I like using camel cases a lot, but in Python we are recommended that when we are defining our variable names or function names, we use the snake case. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. If you like the tutorial, hit the subscribe button and like the video to motivate me to create more of these tutorials from time to time. Otherwise, until next time, peace.